Exorcisms are never a very pleasant scene to begin with. It's the action of freeing a person's soul from the clutch of a demon, and oftentimes can get a little bit ugly. The 5 scenarios we're going to look at today definitely take that to a whole nother level. What is good, my friends? My name is Nicholas Playlog, and in this video we're going to be looking at the top 5 scary events that took place during exorcisms. Let's get into it. Number 5 on this list is the exorcism of Kennedy Ife. Kennedy Ife was a 26-year-old man who reportedly became possessed by a demon. It started when he got an unexplained pain in his throat and then began to act very strange. He complained that there was a python inside of him and it forced him to bite his own father. He even threatened to cut off his own before his family strapped him to his bed and tied him down. His brother later said to the police that it's clear that this thing was in him. What we believed was a demon because it was not natural. It was clearly trying to kill him. Kennedy did sadly die, however it wasn't at the hands of a demon, but actually by his own family. Kennedy had been tied to his bed for 3 days before his brother called for medical help. He was extremely dehydrated and developed breathing problems as he was lying there. When the paramedics got there, they pronounced him dead at the scene. The family had attempted to exorcise this demon out of Kennedy through prayer and extensive force. Kennedy's body had been battered through this exorcism as the family attempted to cure his soul. They were eventually all charged with manslaughter, however the jury found them not guilty in court and they were set free. Personally, I can't even imagine how brutal it would have been to be strapped to a bed for 3 days straight, getting beaten and slowly dehydrating. Truly a horrible way to die. Number 4 on this list is Fyodor Laxmann. Fyodor Laxmann was a Russian farmer in the early 1800s. For a long time, Fyodor had been in disputes with one of his close neighbors for farmland. They had developed a deep hatred for one another and would often sabotage each other's crops. Laxmann eventually reached a breaking point after another blow from his neighbor and ended the dispute once and for all by murdering him and his family as they slept. A season passed and Laxmann and his family prospered with the new land and their abundance of crops. However, during this time, something began happening in their home. The family felt unwanted there and signs of a demonic presence could be seen. After a while, the wife couldn't stand it anymore and she demanded that they have an exorcist come look at their home. They managed to find an exorcist several villages over to come and take a look at their house. He set up his supplies and was going to perform a ritual to cleanse the house of any demonic presence. When he began the ritual though, that demonic presence finally made itself abundantly clear. A shadow figure erupted from the wall and forced itself into Fyodor's body. It looked like a ghost had immediately entered his soul and taken all control of his actions. Fyodor's eyes went immediately bloodshot and he turned to his shocked wife and said the words, "You take from me, I take from you." Then he reached out his hands and before the exorcist could stop him, strangled his own wife in front of his children, killing her where she stood. Right as her body fell to the floor, his did as well, devoid of life. A minute later, he started to slowly rouse himself and after seeing what he had done, broke into a deep sob. He knew that the ghost of his dead neighbor had haunted them and now Fyodor was forced to live with the fact that he killed his own wife with his bare hands. Number 3 on this list is Rosetta Planker. Rosetta Planker was a young girl from the 1940s who became possessed by an evil demon. Her parents noticed that she started acting strange when her notebooks began filling up with demonic drawings and her nice innocent attitude vanished for dark depression out of nowhere. She started having issues at school which was completely out of character for her and the parents got to a point where they had to take her out. One day they found her in her room with her eyes rolled to the back of her head, stabbing one of her dolls repeatedly. It was at this point that they realized they had to get a professional in to perform an exorcism. They contacted their local pastor who set them up with a weathered exorcist. This exorcist had seen his fair share of demonic possessions in his day, but even he wasn't prepared for what happened during Rosetta's exorcism. They laid Rosetta on the bed and strapped her in as they typically would. Then the exorcist began performing his ceremony, but it didn't take long for things to get out of hand. Rosetta began to float off of the bed, flailing her limbs as best as she could under the restraints. Her head started spinning around and around in a completely inhuman way, looking as if it was breaking her neck over and over and over again. She was screaming at this point, but it wasn't her voice or any voice that anyone present was familiar with, nor was the voice making any sense, just demonic gibberish nobody could understand. When her ascension reached as high as the restraints would allow, her chest kept going, further up and further up, until finally her chest snapped open and blood exploded everywhere. A black ooze spouted onto her parents, and the exorcist sending them back and disorienting them. The exorcist was forced to stop as he was blown back and covered in this black ooze. When he wiped it off his face and opened his eyes, he saw the ugly remains of Rosetta laying on the bed. The demon had clung onto her soul so tightly that it refused to leave without taking her with it. I can't even possibly imagine what it would have been like to be in that room, or for the parents having to watch something like that. Number 2 on this list is Anneliese Michel. Anneliese Michel's exorcism story actually inspired the very popular horror film The Exorcism of Emily Rose. What happened to Anneliese is certainly not pretty. She was a young German woman who was born in the 50s. All of her life she struggled with serious mental health issues. Depression, hallucinations, and bad psychosis were all side effects of these problems, which she actually had to be hospitalized for at some points. What was very strange was that her symptoms would often coincide with her being around religious acts or religious paraphernalia. This led her extremely religious parents and Anneliese herself to believe that she was possessed by a demon and needed it to be exorcised. She began having exorcisms performed to her when she was 22 years old, and they went on for 10 months. In those 10 months, she had a ridiculous amount of exorcisms performed on her, with the count reaching above 70. That is more than an exorcism a week that was happening to her. After these brutal 10 months though, Anneliese died. The cause of her death was a mixture of malnutrition, emaciation, and just pure starvation. The priests in charge of her exorcisms were taking extreme measures to get this demon out of her and abuse her body along the way. This case was brought to the court, and it was proven that these priests were guilty of negligent homicide and had to serve jail time for her death. Similar to Kennedy, it was actually the exorcisms themselves and not the demon that took her life, which is pretty scary if you ask me. Number 1 on this list is the Panama Exorcisms. Now I wish that I could describe exactly the ongoings of these exorcisms, but sadly we only have access to the aftermath of what transpired here. The Panama Exorcisms happened in an indigenous jungle area of Panama and resulted in the murder of 7 people. The bodies of these 7 people included the likes of a pregnant woman, 5 of her children, and their neighbor. They were found in a mass grave and looked to be only the beginning of the murders if these murderous exorcisms hadn't been stopped when they were. That's because 15 other people were freed from captivity when the police raided the area. Apparently, an indigenous-run sect had been performing so-called exorcisms and murdering people if they hadn't fully repented for their sins. The prosecutor of this case is quoted saying they were performing a ritual inside the structure. In that ritual, there were people being held against their will, being mistreated. All of these rites were aimed at killing them if they didn't repent their sins. The place where they were performing these exorcisms was a church where they found a naked woman, machetes, and a ritually sacrificed goat amongst other religious paraphernalia. What this group did was kidnap people and then bring them here to perform what they thought was God's will. The leader of the group said that they had received a message from God, and that's why they were doing this. This brutal atrocity only happened a little over a year ago as well, so it's still very fresh. I don't know exactly what happened in these exorcisms, but we do know that it resulted in the murder of 7 innocent people, which is just about as scary and sad as you can get. Well, there you have it, guys. That is our list of the top 5 scary events that took place during exorcisms. Please let me know in the comments down below what you thought about this list, or any scary exorcism stories that you might have. Please hit the like and subscribe button. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Any scary exorcism stories that you might have. Please hit the like and subscribe. Please hit the like and subscribe. Subscribe, Nick. Subscribe. Please hit the like and subscribe button. What is that word?